Hello, U.S. history students. So, in the first lesson for this week, we are going to be talking about the main battles, or some of the main battles, during World War II in both Europe and the Pacific. Now, last week, we had a lesson on the overall strategy in both these theaters for both sides, the Allies and the Axis powers. In Europe, the Allied strategy is defeat Hitler first. The United States is going to send the majority of its men and supplies into Europe first to get rid of Hitler. The Axis strategy in Europe is, according to Hitler, he's going to knock out the Soviet Union quickly and get its oil fields. Then he's going to get Britain out of the war, and he's going to keep the United States out of the war. And we talked about none of those materialize in the course of the action in Europe. In the Pacific, our strategy is island hopping. Okay, we're going to move from island to island, getting closer and closer to Japan, turning those islands into bases with the ultimate goal of having an all-out invasion of Japan. Okay. Of course, we know that doesn't happen because of the use of atomic bombs. The Axis strategy in the Pacific is Japan is going to take over a bunch of places, okay, Indonesia, the Philippines, Hawaii, and Australia, and it assumes that we are not going to do anything to challenge it, that we don't want to fight a costly and bloody war, and we know that that does not materialize. So today, what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at five battles, a couple in, or three in Europe and a couple in the Pacific, that fit into these overall strategies. Now, I highly recommend that you use the map that I emailed out to you guys. I tried to upload it on Canvas, and the software was messing up the maps and things like that, and it was becoming very, very difficult to use. So I highly recommend you use the email that I sent you guys, okay? Because that worksheet will really, really help you get stuff filled in, okay? So let's start off here. We're going to start with Europe first. All right, we got a little map, and we need to label some of the key areas that we've talked about. And we're going to start here with this island nation right there. That is Great Britain. Okay. Then we're going to come over here. This big country over here is the Soviet Union. Okay. Then we're going to move down here to Germany in the center. Next door to Germany is France. And then the boot, Italy. And then last but not least, we're going to add two new territories to this map that are going to play a role in the battles that we talk about today. We're going to talk about North Africa and the Middle East. Okay, so be sure you've got these labeled: Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Soviet Union, North Africa, and the Middle East. Now, you don't have to shade it in like I did, but draw some arrows. Remember, Germany and Italy are on the Axis side. Draw some arrows representing how far the Axis powers expand, okay? So do something a little like this, all right? Draw some arrows out of Germany. Germany comes into France. Italy is going to come down here to North Africa. Germany is going to come over here into Eastern Europe, all the way into the Soviet Union. And of course, up here is going to do Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Okay, it's going to take over this area over here. All right. So draw some arrows representing the extent of Axis control during World War II. Then the last thing on the map, you'll notice there are three dots. Those are going to coincide with the three battles that we talk about. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm going to go in reverse chronological order here. We're going to start over here in France with the D-Day invasion. We're going to talk about the D-Day invasion. Then we're going to jump down here into North Africa and mention the Battle of El Alamein. And then we're going to jump up here into the Soviet Union and mention the Battle of Stalingrad. Now, I wish I had more time to go into more battles like the Battle of the Bulge. I think we ought to talk about the Battle of the Bulge, but we just don't have time, and they're not covered on the SOLs. Okay. Now, I will do this in chronological order, which means we're going to start with the Battle of Stalingrad. So let's talk about the Battle of Stalingrad first. Okay. All right, here we go. Battle of Stalingrad. All right, where's the Battle of Stalingrad? In the east. Okay, it's in the Soviet Union. All right, now this goes down there at the bottom. There should be some fill in the blanks down there at the bottom. Technically, it lasts from July 1942 until February 1943. Now, who's involved? Keep in mind, all right, at this point in time, we're not fully involved yet. The Battle of Stalingrad is going to be fought between Soviet Union and the Germans. Remember, Hitler backstabbed Stalin. He broke that non-aggression pact and invaded the Soviet Union. So it's Germany versus the Soviet Union. Hitler wanted Soviet oil fields. The Battle of Stalingrad is going to prevent Germany from getting those oil fields. It is a Soviet victory. Okay. It is also considered the turning point of the war in the East. The Soviets are going to win this battle and they're going to start pushing back against Germany, pushing Germany back across the eastern part of Europe, back to its home base in Germany. Okay. Now, here's the story of the battle. You don't have to copy anything down, but I wanted to fill in some details. The Germans had been fighting the Soviet Union since June 1941. That's when Hitler originally backstabbed Stalin, June 1941. In November 1941, the Germans are stopped right outside of Moscow and Leningrad by the bitter cold. We talked last week about the fact that Hitler didn't pay attention in history class. He's going to make the same mistake that Napoleon made. He's going to try to invade the Soviet Union. Napoleon invaded Russia, but he's going to try to invade the Soviet Union. He doesn't allow himself enough time, and winter sets in. Okay, and Hitler is not prepared for the Soviet winter. By the spring, the German tanks are ready to roll again. Now, Hitler is surprised by the Soviet response. The Soviets are putting up a fight around Moscow and Leningrad. So he decides to move the bulk of his army down and begin attacking Stalingrad. Okay, in the summer of 1942, the Germans once again take the offensive in southern Soviet Union, and they decide they're going after Stalingrad, which is a major industrial center in Russia. The German army is going to confidently approach Stalingrad in August 1942. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, is going to begin the first parts of those blitzkrieg tactics. They begin nightly bombing raids over the city. And nearly every single wooden building in Stalingrad is set ablaze. The situation is so desperate that the Soviet officers in Stalingrad recommend lowering the city's or blowing up the city's factories and abandoning the city. Stalin is not going to have that. This is his city. It's named after him. Okay, so he orders them, I don't care what you do, but you got to defend this city no matter what the cost. This is my namesake city. You've got to defend this city. For weeks, the Germans press in on Stalingrad, conquering it by house to house fighting. Okay, there's brutal hand to hand combat. And by late September, they conquer about 9/10 of the city. But it's late September. Guess what's brewing in the Soviet Union? Another winter. And once again, Hitler has not learned from the past. He's already experienced one Soviet winter. But another winter sets in. Germans are not prepared. And the Soviets see this as an opportunity to roll fresh tanks across the frozen landscape and begin a massive counterattack. The Soviets are used to this. So the Soviet Union basically moves its army around the city. So not only is it encircling Stalingrad, but now it's encircling the German attackers of Stalingrad as well. And because the Soviet army has enclosed Stalingrad, it's trapped the Germans in and has cut off German supplies. So Germany's situation is hopeless. And now it's Germany asking, hey, can we get out of here? We need to retreat. And Hitler says, no, you guys are going to stay. The fighting continues throughout the winter. Okay, Stalingrad is a frozen wasteland. Again, the Soviets are prepared, the Germans are not, and there is no hope for the Germans of relief whatsoever. Okay, this is about the worst situation the German army could be in. On January the 31st, 1943, the German command asks for surrender terms. Okay, and 2 days later, in February, the surrender becomes official. All right, so Stalin, the Soviet army, protects his city. In defending Stalingrad, the Soviets lost a total of 1,100,000 soldiers, more than all the American deaths during the entire span of World War II. Okay? Despite the staggering death toll, the Soviet army marks a turning point in the war. From that point on, the Soviet army begins to move westward towards Germany. They're pushing the German army back east as they move westward toward Germany. The bottom line in this battle, hundreds of thousands of German soldiers were killed or captured in the months-long siege of Stalingrad, and this defeat prevented Germany from seizing the Soviet oil fields and turns the tide against Germany in the east. One more thing I want to say about Stalingrad and about the Soviet role in the war. Um, the Soviets lose more than any other country. But because they are associated with communism and because of their actions after the war, they receive very little sympathy. And that's kind of sad for the Soviet Union to have had the war cost them so much and to receive so little sympathy for it. But that's the Battle of Stalingrad. Turning point in the war in the East prevents Hitler from getting those Soviet oil fields. Now, let's go to El Alamein. The Battle of El Alamein is in North Africa. The date is May 1943. It's the British versus the Italians and the Germans. And the impact is it's going to keep Germany from getting Middle Eastern oil and the Suez Canal. Okay? Because Italy and Germany hoped that using North Africa as a base, they could move into the Middle East. They could seize Middle Eastern oil. They could seize the Suez Canal. And then maybe they could move north from the Middle East and attack the Soviets from the south. Okay? So here's the story of El Alamein. Italian forces originally launched an invasion of North Africa all the way back in 1940. The British, who are down in North Africa, fight back and they inflict heavy damage on the Italians. Hitler, to back up his friend Mussolini, sends in German forces under the command of Erwin Rommel. Rommel is known as the Desert Fox, and he pushes the British back, okay, into Egypt to El Alamein by July 1942. It looks like Rommel and the Germans are about ready to overrun the British and take the Suez Canal and then get into the Middle East. But just like what happens in the Soviet Union, Hitler has extended himself. He's not prepared to fight in North Africa. His supply lines are long, and he has trouble getting fuel and ammunition, among other supplies, to Rommel in North Africa. And Rommel is suffering from shortages. In the fall of 1942, Montgomery stages a counterattack. He pushes Rommel's troops steadily westward out of Egypt and into Libya. And this battle is going to turn the corner for the Allies in North Africa. Okay? The bottom line is that German forces were threatening to seize Egypt and the Suez Canal have now been defeated by the British. This defeat is going to keep Hitler from gaining access to the Middle East, from gaining access to those oil supply, and again from potentially attacking the Soviet Union from the south. And then last but not least, we got D-Day. D-Day is in France, specifically the coast of Normandy. It takes place on June the 6th, 1944. It is us, the British, Canadians, a bunch of other allied nations versus the Germans. Impact is heavy casualties, but it begins the liberation of Western Europe. Okay, the Allies are going to get a foothold in the West as the Soviets are pushing in against Germany from the East, and basically we're going to start strangling Germany in between. All right, so here's the story of D-Day. Even as the Allies were battling for Italy, Stalingrad, and North Africa, they were also working on a dramatic plan to invade France and free Western Europe from the Nazis. The attack, the attack known as Operation Overlord, fell on the shoulders of American General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Under Eisenhower's direction in England, the Allies gather a force of nearly 3 million British, American, and Canadian troops, together with mountains of military equipment and supplies. And the plan of attack is in Normandy, which is in northern France. To keep their plans secret, the Allies set up a huge phantom army of its own, with its own headquarters and its own equipment, much closer to Germany across from Calais. Okay, Calais is also in France, but it had been taken by the Germans. This phantom army was kind of under the command of George Patton. And Hitler was sure that Patton was going to be part of this invasion force. So Hitler and the German high command are watching Patton. The Allies even sent radio messages that they knew the Germans could read. And in those radio messages, they put in fake orders to make the Germans believe that they were going to attack at the French port of Calais, which was about 150 miles away. It's where the English Channel is narrowest. So that's another reason that Hitler assumed the attack was gonna come in Calais. So he kept a lot of generals and a lot of forces at Calais. The Allied invasion, codenamed Operation Overlord, was originally set for June the 5th, but bad weather forced a delay. The weather report said there's going to be a narrow break on June the 6th. If you're going to go, you need to go, or else you're going to have to wait a few more weeks. The next big break is going to come in a couple weeks. So if you're going to go, you got to go June the 6th. So, banking on a forecast of clearing skies, Eisenhower gave the go ahead for D Day on June the 6th, 1944, the first day of the invasion. Shortly after midnight on June the 6th, 3 divisions of paratroopers parachuted down behind German lines. Their job was to disrupt communication and cause general chaos, okay, because they were going to be followed in the early morning hours by thousands upon thousands of seaborne soldiers. This is the largest land, sea, and air operation in Army history. Despite the massive air and sea bombardment by the Allies, German retaliation was pretty brutal on the beaches, particularly Omaha Beach. From a soldier that was there, I quote from his writings, people were yelling, screaming, dying, running on the beach. Equipment was flying everywhere. Men were bleeding to death, crawling, lying everywhere. Fire coming from all directions. Despite heavy casualties, the Allies held the beachheads. And after 7 days of fighting, they're going to hold a strip of land about 80 miles into France. Okay, so from June the 6th, we gain a foothold at Normandy on June the 6th. And then the next 7 days, we're going to push steadily inward. And by the end of that 7 days, we have an 80-mile stretch from the beaches into France. Within a month, we had landed 1 million troops, 567,000 tons of supplies, and 170,000 vehicles in France. On August the 25th, 1944, French resistance troops, and American troops liberate the French capital of Paris after 4 years of German occupation. The bottom line, American and Allied troops under Eisenhower landed in German-occupied France on June the 6th, 1944. Despite intense German opposition and heavy American casualties, the landings succeed and the liberation of Western Europe from Hitler has begun. Okay, this is the beginning of the end for Hitler and the Axis powers in Europe. Now, switching gears completely, let's move to the Pacific. Now, here in the Pacific, we're going to label some more countries. We're going to start here with Japan. Okay. Then here's China, Hawaii, Midway, Guam, the Philippines, both of which we control because of the Spanish-American War. Actually, the Philippines are under Japanese control, but they were our territory. Iwo Jima, Okinawa. And I also want you to notice these 2 dots right here. These are 2 important cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay? You might want to draw a little arrow out and just put Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. All right? We'll talk about those in a few minutes. Now, just like we did in Europe, I want you to draw some arrows coming out of Japan to the areas. There's Hiroshima, there's Nagasaki. Okay. I want you to draw some arrows coming out of Japan representing the territory that they control. Okay. So out of Japan, draw some arrows. Again, you don't have to worry about shading them in, but notice all this territory that the Japanese control. Okay. I also want you to draw some arrows coming out of Hawaii representing our island hopping strategy. Okay, we're going to jump over here to Midway, and then we're going to come down here to Tarawa, and then we're going to Guam and the Philippines, and then eventually over here to Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Okay, so draw some arrows coming out of Hawaii representing island hopping. Now, we're not going to talk about Pearl Harbor. We mentioned Pearl Harbor when we got involved in the war. But the two battles that we're really going to focus on in the Pacific are Midway and Iwo Jima and Okinawa. We're going to start with Midway. Okay. Midway is in the Pacific. It is us versus the Japanese. Why is it important? Why do we mention it? It's because this begins our island hopping strategy. It is also a revenge battle for Pearl Harbor. Okay. We're going to go after Midway 1942. And this is going to be in retaliation for the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The reason this battle is important, we win and we defeat a much larger force. In fact, when the report is brought back to Roosevelt, the report said something like 4 battleships destroyed. Roosevelt, our president, thought they were talking about our battleships. And he said, wait a minute, we only have 3. And the guy that brought him the report said, yeah, I know, those are Japanese battleships. Okay. So we defeated a much larger force. We start island hopping and we protect the rest of Hawaii. Okay. Remember, part of Japan's plan was to invade and take over Hawaii and Australia. The Battle of Midway will end that threat to Hawaii. Okay. Hawaii will be protected. Now, from there, we move down into Tarawa, we move to Guam, we move to Philippines, and then we're going to end up at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Again, where are Iwo Jima and Okinawa? They're in the Pacific. Once again, it is us versus the Japanese. Why is it important? These battles bring us the closest to Japan. Another reason it's important, and this has the bigger impact, to be honest with you, there are high casualties. We won, but there are high casualties. Okay, they're high casualties for us, they're high casualties for Japan. Now, why is this significant? This is going to prompt Truman to decide to use the atomic bombs. If it took that many lives to take these 2 islands, both Japanese and American, you can imagine the amount of carnage that's going to take place with an all-out invasion of Japan. It's going to be horrendous for both us and the Japanese. Up to 1 million casualties are expected on our side alone because the Japanese are so loyal. And Truman, as much as he hates to do it, says, okay, let's use the atomic bomb and try to end this quickly. Now, I want you to get down one more thing about the Pacific. I want you to get down some fast facts. We already talked about the Battle of Midway allowed us to begin our island hopping strategy. Iwo Jima and Okinawa are considered the turning points of the war with Japan because they got us the closest to Japan. Okay, they are considered Allied victories. They got us the closest to Japan. But because of the high number of casualties, that prompted us to decide to use the atomic bombs. The atomic bomb that we drop on Hiroshima is Little Boy. The atomic bomb that we drop on Nagasaki is Fat Man. And again, the reason we do that is to prevent a land invasion, which is going to cost a lot of lives on both sides. We want to end the war quickly and prevent further U.S. and Japanese casualties. And then I want you to get down these last 2 terms here. Kamikaze, which is a Japanese suicide bomber, and the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was the name given to the project to develop the atomic bomb. Now, this is a real quick overview of the end of the war in Japan. We're actually going to go into a little bit more detail with this in our next presentation because that's what that presentation is going to be about, is the end of the war. So right now, I want you to see that Okinawa and Iwo Jima, they're going to be the turning points because they prompt us to use the atomic bombs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in our next lesson. Now, review the material in this little presentation, okay? And then you've got a little quiz on these key battles during World War II.